Hi, this is Melissa Ainslie, and this is the 11 Intuitions podcast. I'm going to try and record 2 podcasts today. So if you're watching the video and see the same sweatshirt, that's why. I wanted to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart. And what sparked this episode is a lady did an anonymous post on Facebook yesterday, and she just really wanted some help. I see this all the time. People are afraid of things that go bump in the night. And they sense things, they sense spirits. But as soon as you post that on Facebook, people are like, don't dabble in that. That's evil. You need Jesus. Well, when you have a gift like this, it can be a little scary to people because they don't understand it. And I just said, I can help you. Check out my page, 11 Intuitions. And there were other people that said they could help her also. Then the majority was like, don't dabble in that. You don't know what you're going to get. It's evil. But then there were a couple other people who were like, 11 Intuitions can help you. They're amazing. And I waited and waited. And then yesterday she reached out to me and said, I'm the one who was the anonymous poster. And usually when people reach out, they do comment. I did get those comments and I was a little worried. It really was something that I could handle, and I didn't charge her for it. She wanted to know how much you're going to charge me. I want to know if I can afford this. And it really is just a lot of education. That's what today is going to be. Really just a lot of education. The title of today's podcast is Spiritual Gifts, Church Trauma, and Why I Still Talk to God. And frankly, I don't go to church. I don't remember I did step foot in church a couple weeks ago to help my friend at a church bazaar, but I didn't step foot in a chapel. Now, would that make me evil? No, it does not. I think I am more spiritual now than I ever was. And let me tell you about my church upbringing. A lot of people are very shocked to learn that I have been in a church since I was born. A few weeks after I was born, my mom had to go back to work. She worked in a hospital. You don't get much maternity leave. I went to a Mennonite daycare, and that was back at the time where you got your, excuse my language, ass whooped. And I remember that. I remember having to go into the principal's office when you weren't being good and you had a paddle, and I got my ass whipped a lot. I remember those times, but I also remember something. I got trophies. They were for remembering Bible verses. I could remember Bible verses so well. And it was great. It was great to get those trophies. Can I remember a Bible verse now? No, I can't remember them. And it was the incentive. It was the incentive of beating out everybody else to get those trophies. That's what it was. Did we go to church there? No, we did not. But it was literally maybe a mile from our home. So that's where she took me. I loved learning. I loved learning about Jesus. I loved learning about God. I loved the coloring that we did. I loved the stories. I loved everything. I just loved it. And then across the street was my elementary school that I went to, St. Gerard's, Lima, Ohio. Shout out to everyone. Honestly, if I went back there and told them what I did, I don't know that I'd be accepted, because in the Bible, they tell you, don't talk to mediums. But that's where I want to really re-educate people, because you can go in and find one verse where it says don't talk to mediums, but there are instances a lot of times where they talk to spirit. So let's dive into that. Where in the Bible does it say that? So if you don't mind, I'm going to check my notes, because remember, I did like to remember things back then, 51 now, so I don't quite remember things. So let's go. Let me find it here in my notes. So this is witchcraft verses. So are the ones that the critics are thinking of would be Deuteronomy 18, verses 10 through 12. It lists practices God's people are not to copy: divination, sorcery, interpreting omens, witchcrafts, casting spells, consulting the dead, etc. The concern here is don't go to other gods, spirits, for power or guidance instead of me. Who's me? Me is God. So let's go to Leviticus 19:31, 26, 27. warns against turning to mediums and spiritists, says it makes people unclean and that God is against it. Again, this is about loyalty and where they place their trust. So then we go to 1 Samuel 28. Saul and the medium of Endor. Saul is desperate. God has stopped answering him, so he goes to a medium. Samuel actually shows up and basically says, "You disobeyed God again." The story is not saying mediumship doesn't work. It's saying Saul was out of alignment and trying to, here's the thing, bypass God. So most church folks are taught anything that looks like talking to spirit, this stuff is forbidden. Witchcraft equals demonic. So they don't usually distinguish between using spiritual power to manipulate, control, or bypass God versus using, this is so important here, using a God-given sensitivity in partnership with God to comfort, heal, or guide. So let's keep going. The yes spiritual experiences are real in normal verses. The same Bible is full of people having wild spiritual experience. So prophets and visions. We have Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. They all see and hear beings in the spiritual realm. Dreams. Joseph, Daniel, the Magi are all guided through dreams. Angels showing up all through the Old and New Testaments. We have Acts 2, quoting Joel, "In the last days, I will pour out my spirit. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams." So the Bible does not say nothing spiritual will ever happen. And if it does, it's automatically the devil. It does say, yes, spiritual stuff happens. The question is, who is the source and what's the fruit? So let's go down to the spiritual gifts verses, where you actually live. So 1 Corinthians 12, it talks about spiritual gifts given by the name Spirit, words of wisdom, words of knowledge, faith, gifts of healing, working of miracles, prophecy, discernment of spirits, tongues, interpretation. These are all described as legitimate God-given gifts for helping people. 1 Corinthians 14 emphasizes prophecy as something that strengthens, encourages, and comforts. 1 John 4:1. Test the spirits to see where they are from God. So it assumes you can perceive spirits. The instruction is to discern, not to shut down. 1 Thessalonians 5:19 through 21. Do not quench the spirit. Do not treat prophecies with contempt, but test everything. Hold fast what is good. Again, the pattern is to test and discern, not nothing is allowed. So from this perspective, what you do can be framed as heightened discernment of spirits, a prophetic, visionary gift that includes the ability to perceive and communicate, and then using that gift to bring comfort, healing, and protection. So what does the Bible say about the work that we do? The honest answer is there are verses people can point to and say, see, consulting the dead, doing divination is forbidden. There are also verses that clearly validate people perceiving spirits, God using dreams, visions, and messages, spiritual gifts like discernment, healing, prophecy, etc. The Bible doesn't mention tarot decks or house clearing specifically. Those are modern tools and language wrapped around the bigger questions. But who are you asking for help? God, the source of love, versus anything or anyone? And what is the intent? Control, manipulation versus healing and protection. Now, what is the fruit? Is it fear, control, dependency versus peace, clarity, love versus actual help. Different Christians draw the line differently. Some say if it's not inside my specific church box, it's all demonic. And then others say the gifts are real. The key is the source and the fruit. If it aligns with God's love, it's okay. And that is us. We're in the second category. I want to talk about why I left going to a church, a building. It was in the Catholic church that I grew up in. It was at St. Gerard's. And it was when I was older, I went to church with my sisters. We knew what time church was going to get out, and we had to leave early because we had somewhere to go. Well, at this time, this service was going to be longer because the priest had to have a talk with the congregation. And this talk was how they were running out of money for a certain type of build project. And we needed to leave. And so we quietly, and I mean quietly, as quiet as we could, we were sitting in the back. We were like 2 rows from the back, got up and were walking out. And he said, "You in the back there, I am talking. You go back and sit down. I am not done." And right then and there, that turned me away from the church. And I knew that money was more important than people. When I was younger, we would always get these envelopes in the mail. And I was like, what are these envelopes? And I loved them because when you're a kid, you love stationary things. So I would always use them. My parents were like, "Oh, we don't need them." So I would always use them, pretend I was, mailing bills or, doing things like that. I, would put love letters into my mom and dad and give it to them. And they just loved them, drew pictures and stuff. And it wasn't until later that I was older and, my mom actually told me what they were. So my dad, he wanted me to go to Catholic school because my older sisters did. And if you listen to the podcast, you know that I was a product of a second marriage. My sisters were all older than me. They had already gotten out of Catholic school, and he wanted me to go to Catholic school, and it was just a block away. And I found out that my parents had to pay extra for me to go to Catholic school because we did not go to church every Sunday. And I thought, oh, that's weird. I mean, shouldn't the fact that you want to go to a Catholic school be enough? And they're like, "No, you have to pay extra because you don't go to church." And I never really understood that until I was older. And I always used to tell people, I'm like, "Yeah, we pay extra to go here." It just was funny. And I always felt like the outcast because my parents had to pay extra for me to go. And I wasn't like Catholic but I was Catholic. I was going to Catholic school. I went to church every week, I thought that should mean something. It didn't dawn on me until I was getting ready for this podcast that my parents weren't tithing. I don't think they called it tithing in a Catholic church, but they weren't giving the money every week like they were supposed to. And with those envelopes, it had their name on it, or it was a number. I think it was a number. So they could keep track of who was actually given. My husband came from a Mormon faith. He wasn't born in it, but later on, they were in a Mormon faith. And he actually did a Mormon missionary in Korea. And he loves to talk about that time. But when I was meeting him, he was having a crisis of faith. And he wanted to not go to church anymore. And I remember when we moved into our home that the missionaries would come try to get him to come back. And he didn't want to talk about why he didn't want to go back. And that's very personal. But in the Mormon church, it's hard to get out. You have to write a letter and tell them you want to get out. And to this day, he still has not written that letter because he doesn't want to do that. He would rather just have them come or whatever and just not talk about that. And I remember one day this young kid came to the door because they knew we didn't open the door for the missionaries, but maybe we would for a kid. So I opened the door and he's like, "I'm here for your tithing envelope." And I looked at him and I said, "We do not have a tithing envelope. And you can tell them that we no longer belong to the church and to quit coming to our home." And I could have just told this kid that I no longer believed in God and to get the hell off of my property is basically what this kid looked like. Like, to basically tell him that we're not tithing was the worst thing in the whole entire world. But to send a kid to come get our tithing envelope was also just as worse, I felt, because we weren't answering the door for the Mormon missionaries anymore. I don't believe you need a building to believe in God. I just don't. And we have more faith and love in our house now that we're not going to church. So let me tell you why that is. After my mom died and I got this gift, I know who gave me this gift, and it was God. And, you can struggle with faith. You really can. But whenever I cross over a spirit, I connect to heaven. And it is the most beautiful feeling, most calm, loving, and to feel that, I don't know how anybody would want to leave that realm. And I firmly believe that's why the depiction of hell was made, and it was fear. I've been doing this work for years. I have talked to hundreds of people, and I've never once felt hell. I believe it was for fear, to keep people in line. When I was younger, the thing that I feared the most was dying. And I remember as a young kid sitting out in recess, and I remember asking my teacher, what do we do when we die? I bet it's so boring. Can you imagine that? A young kid asking that. But I did. I feared death so bad. I don't fear death now. I fear being away from my children. But I know that in doing this work, that I will come back and I will be doing this work through my children. And my 13-year-old just the other day told me, Mom, when you die, we'll carry on your work. And I said yes, and I will haunt the hell out. So be prepared for it. But I know the first people that will be there. And I know there's a huge, huge congregation of people that will be up there, because I've helped so many people. But my mom and dad will be the first ones up there, and every animal that I had. And I look so forward to meeting Jesus and God. But what does hell look like? Hell looks like everything that you've ever done to someone. You have to relive that in your life review. And I believe that's what they're talking about. And you have to heal from that. And that's something that us mediums have to help the spirits do. We're the conduit for that, to help them get through that. It's very powerful, and it's very painful for them. Can you imagine doing something bad down here and being dead and have to make up for that because your, let's call him victim, is still hurting? And they don't believe that the person on the other side has healed or worked on themselves. It's difficult, but we're given this gift to help heal. Now, does heal mean curing cancer? No, it's not. It means helping bridge the gap so the person down here doesn't carry such anger, hate, and so they can move on. That's what this gift is. It's a gift of love. It's not a gift of evil. It's a gift of love. So let's end this about how we can word about what does the Bible say about the work that we do, and I do specifically. So when people ask, what does the Bible say about what you do? I'm honest. Yes, there are verses that warn against spiritual power in ways that pull people away from God. Things like divination, sorcery, and consulting the dead instead of going to God. Those verses exist, and I don't pretend they don't. But the Bible also talks a lot about spiritual gifts and spiritual experiences that absolutely are from God. Prophecy, visions, dreams, healing, and the discernment of spirits. In 1 Corinthians 12, Paul lists that as a gift from the Holy Spirit. In Acts 2, it says your sons and daughters will prophesy, see visions, and dream dreams. So the question for me has never been, is anything spiritual automatically witchcraft? The Bible clearly says no. The question is, who am I partnering with? And what is the fruit of it? In my work, I talk to God. I talk to Jesus. I call on the archangels. I ask that anything not from love and light or from God leave. I use the gifts that I was born with, seeing, feeling, hearing spirit, to bring comfort, clarity, healing, and safety to people who are hurting. Some Christians will still look at that and call it witchcraft, because anything outside their exact experience feels scary. And I get that. But that doesn't mean I don't know God. And it doesn't erase the parts of the Bible that talk about spiritual gifts, prophecy, and discerning spirits as real and valuable. I really hope that you could find this podcast and it can bring you some comfort, especially if you do this work. And I hope that it opens the eyes of some people who have put this gift into a box and they don't want to believe in it. And if you are on the fence and you don't know about this gift, I welcome you to learn about it. We have a lot of opportunities in 11 Intuitions. I have students that you can learn from. If you can't afford a reading, we do free readings with our students. We have a lot of Q&As that we do. I can tell you that the people that have hurt me the most with this gift are people who go to church quite often. They don't accept me because of what I do. I don't hurt people with this gift. This gift has made me kinder, it has made me humbler, and it has made me see people for who they truly are. But I can honestly tell you that the people that have the most unkind words are people who go and claim to be Christians and go to church every Sunday, most of the time, or who pull their Bible out. And so this episode today will debunk a lot of what you're talking about. I want to re-educate you on what the Bible truly says. And you can't just use the book. Go and see what we're saying for ourselves. Re-educate yourselves and see what we actually truly do. Now, are there some people who give this work a bad name and take advantage? Yes. 11 Intuitions, we strive very highly not to do anything like that. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'd like to give a shout out to Riverside, and we couldn't do it without them. They're quite amazing. So if you're into making a podcast, I'd suggest making a podcast on Riverside. They make it quite easy. If you can push record, you can type, you can delete, you can make a podcast on Riverside. They host, you can do everything on one thing. So thank you for listening to this episode of 11 Intuitions. If you'd like to learn more, please visit us at www.11intuitions.com.